Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening for our pre-meeting. The first item that we are going to be discussing this evening is the Dellwood Central Sidewalk Project discussion. And Mr. Trott, you are lined up and ready to go.
Yes, ma'am. Good evening.
Good evening.
So tonight, wanted to give you an update on where we are with the Dellwood and Central Sidewalk Project. And then also, at the end of the discussion, we'll look for the direction from the board on how you'd like us to move forward. And let me know during this if you have specific questions, can stop at any time. So went out and completed a survey along the route, along the parcels that agreed to let the surveyors on their property, which was most. Our consultant put together some exhibits showing sidewalk on one or the other side of the street. They also identified potential challenges. Those challenges may be grading, could be various utilities such as telecommunications or power, water, sewer, and also trees, existing larger trees that are along the route. So wanted to show not only where the sidewalk would be located, but also, some challenges along the route. We held a public input meeting in person over at the Dellwood Center at the end of February. Had 15 to 20 folks come out on that evening and provide, some of them left some comment sheets and provided feedback. We also posted the concepts online after the meeting and left them out there for 3 weeks to see if anybody had any additional comments. No additional comments through the website were received. We also our consultant completed a ground penetrating radar survey along the cemetery parcel to see if everything out there was identified above the ground or not. That was a non-invasive, I guess. They didn't go down and dig anything. This was just radar that was run along the top of the ground. So the concepts that were created, and these are the ones, these next 3 slides, these are the concepts that were presented at the public input meeting at the end of February. There's a lot of information. It's a big area, so it may be hard to see on the screens in front of you, but the 2 options were presented on the north side or on the south side of Dellwood. And the top one is the north side. As you can see, there's some tree conflicts, utility conflicts, grading conflicts on the northern side of Dellwood. And then on the south side of Dellwood, you have the cemetery, also some grading and other utilities. So there's not a clear no conflict choice between these 2. What staff would recommend between these 2 options, if you wanted to choose one or the other, is on the north side of Dellwood, just because it avoids the cemetery, any potential conflicts with things that are marked or unmarked along that side of the road. Since along that side there is a cemetery along the majority of that section. And we can talk about these as either together, as both Dellwood and Central, or break them apart. If you want to focus and just talk about the section along Dellwood, we can do that. Or we can talk about it all together. I'll move on.
Do you all want to talk about them separately or holistically? Or do you have a preference? No preference. You want to talk about them separately? Okay, so let's just stick with the Dellwood Drive, and let's talk about them separately.
Okay, so on Dellwood, again, as shown on the screen, there's either side. Again, staff's recommendation would be on the north side and be open to any comments or questions from the board on how they'd like to move forward.
Commissioner Partee?
On the north side, where we have residents, has there been any negative pushback regarding the sidewalk or the taking of property as we move forward with the project?
So exact property impacts have not yet been identified because the project hasn't been designed. Only this concept to generally show potential impacts. So we don't know exactly the property needs on the north side or on the south side. Would expect there to be property acquisition needed along both sides of the road, whatever way the board would like to go. No comments along this section from the property owners were received at the public input meeting.
Thank you.
Commissioner Kidwell?
Thank you. Stephen, on the south side, where you've got the potential graveyard conflict area marked out, did the ground penetrating radar find unmarked graves throughout there?
What the data indicated to me was that not everything was marked, and there may be things closer to the road than is marked. I would recommend, if the south side of the road is the choice and the preference, it may be that the sidewalk needs to go where the road currently is and the road shifted to the north if you want to avoid potential conflicts on that side.
And, I don't know, Commissioner Partee asked my other question. Thank you.
Commissioner Kovacs? He asked Commissioner Boone? Commissioner Phillips? So really quick, up on the north side, the grading conflicts, what does that look like? How much grading would need to occur?
So again, there's a lot of detail, and it's hard to see. Grading outside the right-of-way and a little bit further back is generally shown. We can try to minimize that with small retaining walls, but some trees and some grading along that section to the right of where that street is between Dellwood and, not sure the name of that first street there, but we can try to use retaining walls to minimize some of those, but there will be some grading impacts because the ground slopes up from the road there.
So the line that you have there that touches really the house?
That's just a general area.
I just wanted to make sure
Yes,
that
yeah,
was.
we don't have a full design, so we don't know exactly where that line is. But generally, there's some grading in that general area.
And the orange, I see the orange circle in the back, is that a utility pole?
It's a utility conflict.
Yeah, I couldn't read it on my, because it's black and white. That's why I was, and then I guess the green are obviously the trees.
Yes.
Okay,
Definitely there'll
but,
be some trees along that section that would be impacted. Because you have to grade in the sidewalk, pretty close to level slope. There'd be a little bit of slope, and then you have to try to tie back from there. If the ground is already above the road at that point, you're going to have to grade the slope back to tie
and then
back.
build retaining walls along the way.
You could, to try to minimize how far you'd have to grade back. But you'd have to excavate some, put in the retaining wall. So
Correct.
there will be some impacts there.
Commissioner Kidwell?
Stephen, what kind of feedback did we get from the public meeting on the sidewalk for Dellwood?
So the feedback, we received 8 comments back. Most of the comments were positive. We didn't receive a comment that said, I don't want the project and we hope it never comes. Most of the feedback received was positive. Only one person expressed preference on one side of the street. Their expression was go on the other side of the street from where they resided. Another comment received was to extend the sidewalk along Dellwood further, down to Vermillion where it is. That was another comment that was received outside of what was presented.
Okay. Mr. Roberts?
Stephen, are we at a point yet to know sort of what right-of-way exists, does not exist, air property? Because that can be an issue.
Yeah, so full title searches haven't been completed, but we did do full survey to know where property would be needed, and there's little to no right-of-way along this entire section. So on either side of the street, or on either Central or Dellwood. So there'll need to be something acquired either way. It's around 30 parcels, give or take a few, either side of the street, either option. And I don't know if, Anthony, do you have any other experience or past history maybe on other projects?
Yeah, I've worked, I did a Smithfield project when I was in Cornelius. The one thing you know, have to be aware of, we're working with a property right now for a fire station is air property. And you're hearing a lot about that now, and you know, that sometimes can be tough. We run into a property right now that has 32 airs. And that can be, you know, tough to work through and find the heirs, some deceased, some living. It gets very tough. So what I would say to the board is, if we continue to move forward with this project, there will be properties, I would about be willing to guess, that you will not be able to purchase. So if you got in your mind that you're not willing to potentially condemn, I'm just throwing it out there because I've dealt with it before. If that's an issue, then that will be an issue for potentially this project. Just want to lay that out there.
Thank you. So, and the 30 parcels, is that only on this section, or is it all of it?
Both,
Okay,
around 30 parcels total for both sections. If you pick one side of the street or the other, if you go with both sides, you know, it's around 60.
Commissioner Boone?
Yes, I got one question. Looks like there's a cul-de-sac up in the upper right-hand corner. Will there be any fencing done between their backyards and the sidewalk?
That's something we can talk about. Typically, if there's a fence that exists there, the property owner would be compensated for said fence so they could put it back. Typically, we don't go add fencing for a sidewalk project. The only thing we would have to add is if there is a slope that tapers off next to the sidewalk, then there need to be some protection there so that people don't step off the sidewalk and then go down a hill.
Thank you, sir.
Any other questions on this section? Seeing none.
Is there any preference on that, or is this something the board would like to think about more before?
You want direct, so he's looking for direction on this particular section? Commissioner Phillips?
I think that it would be worth exploring, like where the heck no condemnation people are on each side. Like,
We really won't know that until we get into,
can we like have informal conversations with folks so we kind of have a feel? Because you don't want to spend all your time on one side of it and then have your board turn around and then vote against condemnation, because, you know, that's a tricky subject with us, it seems.
Maybe to follow up, Stephen, can we get to a point where we do all the research possible, find out air property, things like that, so that we're in a better position for boards to make decisions? Because if you run into, and I don't know, well, like I say, it may be very fortunate we run into none of those. That would be important because those are typically ones that are tough.
yeah, we can look back through
Try to do all the,
survey data to see if there is, things are in trusts or in air property on that, to see from that perspective.
and we can get individuals to live out there maybe to help us find some of those heirs to track down that may make it easier.
Commissioner Partee?
Yeah, Stephen, in trying to search out that information, we also have organizations within the Pottstown area that can assist you into finding out where those areas might be located. So if you do run into a roadblock, I would reach out to them.
Okay?
Another one, man, may be helpful just from experience. Could we get to a point, Stephen, where we kind of, and maybe you've already done this or you plan on doing it, kind of staking potentially where we anticipate the sidewalk being, may not be exact, but kind of staking so that folks get a general idea, you know, where it may be. So when we're working with property owners, if they see it's 1 foot from the step, then, you know, maybe problematic, or if it's further away, that would give them a good gauge, and you may get a good read of, I'm not for it, I'm willing to negotiate, et cetera.
We can do that based on the general concept area and cut fill limits shown here, or we can take it a step forward and go one step further into design and have a better idea. It's up to you. If you want to stake both sides of the street, we can do that as well, or if you have a preference on one side or the other, we can just do that one.
I think we should go ahead and just stake it and explain that this is a general area of where we feel the sidewalk would go. I'd hate to go and spend all that money on design, and ultimately, we can't do it.
Staking won't be free. I'll just say that.
I'm aware.
Get a surveyor out there, it may be $30,000, $50,000 to get it staked, just to give you a ballpark. So not just a couple $100s, but,
Okay.
so
Madam Mayor, if I may, the only thing from a legal standpoint that I would add is that the board should be cognizant of the fact that the disinterment, removal, and reinterment process, if we were to come across unknown graves or graves that were not marked that had remains, is very complex. It's a very lengthy process and also a very costly process. So that's something to keep in mind when making the decision as to north versus south.
So then my question would be, does the board want to evaluate the southern side of Dellwood? Commissioner Boone?
Madam Mayor, I think it's going to be emotional on either north or the south side, but when you start moving people's graves, I think that comes really, really emotional. And I would prefer us to concentrate and focus on the north side for the sidewalk. And I'll just leave it at that. I think the north side might be the better way to go on this.
Commissioner Kidwell?
I'm going to agree. I think the north side's the focus, not just because it's emotional with deceased remains, but if they're unidentified or unmarked, that adds a whole new caveat into it there.
Anyone else? Okay. So we're going to stick with the north side? And do we want to spend the dollars to generally stake it out, or Commissioner Phillips?
I think that we should. That way people have a true view of what is happening, and that way we're not going to get ourselves further down the road and then end up in litigation, which could potentially cost a lot more in time and money.
I think the one thing about staking it out for folks is that just that visual, to be able to walk out their door and know what that's going to look like. And I think that it will give us an opportunity, if we use it, it can be an opportunity for us to have conversations with the neighbors and honest conversations about what they want to see in their neighborhood, how this could positively impact them. And then also have the conversations around, if there is a negative impact, what does that look like? Yes? Okay.
okay. We'll look to get the north side of Dellwood staked. Thank you. All right. The next two slides, since it's a much longer section, are for Central Avenue. Similar conditions. There's not one side or another that is clear of potential challenges along those. There are not any known cemeteries along this section, so that is not present, but there are grading, utility, and tree conflicts on both sides of the road. This is the northern section, starting at Dellwood at the very left side of the page and then working south. The top one is the west side, the bottom one is the east side. That's this, and then there's a whole nother sheet. Goes all the way down to Holbrooks. And there's challenges along both. Staff's recommendation on this side would be on the west or the top of the page option along this side. That side of the road seems to have less grading conflicts, And also, the homes seem to sit a little bit further back from the road. There's a couple of homes, particularly on the northern end of the project, that sit close to the road. And also, there's a grade difference for those homes that sit close to the road. So that makes it definitely challenging to try to fit in a sidewalk. The homes are close to the road, plus there's a decent difference in grade along those.
Commissioner Kidwell.
Stephen, can you go to the next slide, please?
Sure can.
Thank you. I know when we originally talked about this, there was the need for a culvert, potential replacement down that road.
Where's
that at?
I guess it's right at I'd say the very right side of this. There may need to be a culvert extension,
That's where,
depending.
where 3 is?
That's right at pretty much the very right of the page is where it splits in half. It's really hard to tell right there, but there's a culvert that's down there, and there's a little bit of guardrail there to protect from the slope. But depending on how much we widen or need to widen for the sidewalk and curb and gutter, there may need to be an extension of the culvert on either side, depending on what we find once we get into the design more.
And you said the west side is the preferred?
The staff recommended option is on the west side, which is the top option. That one, again, the homes seem to be a little bit further back from the road. So if there is grading, can work that in before you get to the house or porch, whatever's out there.
Commissioner Kidwell?
And I know the answer to this. I just want it on record. Part of the process, we move forward, or when we move forward, anything that's tore up will be repaired, replaced, like driveways.
Yes, if a driveway is impacted, then it would get replaced with the same kind of driveway. You know, if it's a concrete driveway now, then we put back a concrete driveway.
Thank you.
As part of that.
Commissioner Kovacs?
Did you have any comments from people on this part of the project?
Yeah, the one resident, which was on the very southern end of the project, who indicated, I believe they were on the top corner there across from Hope Brooks, indicated they were fine with the project if it was on the other side of the street, which would be on the side staff is recommending.
Yeah.
Most other all the rest of the comments were from people that did not own property or live right along either side of either of the sections.
Any of this section going to be on someone's front porch?
It does not look like it, again, based on the concepts for the west side. On the very northern end, as pointed out before, there's a couple of properties that are really close to the road, and they're also substantially lower than the road is, so that would be a challenge.
So that's going to be your grading issue there.
Yes.
Commissioner Partee?
Stephen, to date, or to your knowledge, how many homes or how many properties are under leased or are rented out? And have we been in contact with those homeowners? We do not know at this time.
Yeah, we don't know.
Okay, that might be something we might have to run into, we may run into if we do go forward with this project.
Sure, just as we do on any project. We
Correct.
negotiate with the owners
Right,
of the properties.
thank you.
Any other questions? In discussion around what we want to do we want to do the same thing on the west side of Central as we're doing on the north side of Dellwood? Staking it out, taking a look at it from that perspective. We'll need to figure out heirs' property and kind of go from there. Commissioner Boone?
Stephen, what do you think the cost for that survey would be to stake it out?
Yeah, if you're only going to do, again, one side of the street, we'll have to get that price from our consultant. Usually they charge between $500 and $1,000 per parcel to go stake. We may get a better deal if we're going to stake the whole thing all at once. Sometimes the pricing increases for the number of trips that you have to go out there. So if they go out there one time this week, one time next week, it's more expensive than if they did them all at once. So we could get a price to do it all at one time if we're going to stake all at one time for the properties that will allow us on their property to do the staking. We have to get their permission before we can go do that.
Madam Mayor, I think that, if we do one staking for one street, I think we need to do it for both, for everybody, for both
On
sidewalks.
both sides?
No, for both sidewalks, for both.
Oh, yes, Dellwood and Central. And just for clarification, you said 30 parcels. Is that 30 parcels on both sides of the street?
Yeah, so if you chose one side of the street or the other, either way, it's around 30 parcels. So if you chose, total on both streets. So if you chose, say, the west side and the north side, it's around 30. If you chose the east side and the south side, it's around.
But it's not both sides of the road on both streets. That's more parcels. That's what I was,
That'd be around 60.
okay, that's what I was trying to clarify. Commissioner Kovacs?
No, I was just going to say, kind of what Commissioner Boone said, I think it's important to do the stakes because I've heard over the past year and a half residents just asking questions that we don't have the answer to. Well, how close is it going to be? Where's it going to be? How much do you need? So just a general idea and the visualization, I think, will be important.
Anyone else? Commissioner Kidwell?
Yeah, I just want to make sure that we're able to communicate that to the community of what we're doing with the staking, so they don't take it under the impression that we're about to begin construction, that this is just the next step into seeing where everything's going to line out. It's important because I know if I woke up and went outside my house and suddenly I've got stakes in my front yard after someone just said, what do you think about a sidewalk? And like, wait, hold on, what's going on? So,
Yeah, we have to get permission from each property owner before we could go out there and get on their property to do the staking. So somebody that has the property would have to know about it.
Anything else?
So is there a preference on Central? Just want to make sure.
The west side?
Okay. Thank you. We'll get that together and then get it staked and then come back and see what the board would like to do.
Great, thank you so much. So we're now going to move on to our follow-up discussion on the potential 2023 bond referendum. Mr. Roberts?
I'll let you handle that one.
Bobby, do I need to go up there or right here fine? So, Mayor and Board, I think we've had 2 discussions on this topic so far. I think maybe April 17th, April 24th, if my memory serves me. That April 17th was more just introducing the topic. April 24th, a little more fine-tuning it and giving you sort of a staff recommendation. I think you've seen this slide before. We basically took the language from previous bonds. This language would need to change. We'd have bond counsel look at it if you decide to move forward. I think I've stated that before. We've looked at the projects. We looked at kind of what we think we can take on, what we can get done over that time period. Staff would recommend 60 million transportation bonds, 10 million in parks and recreation bonds. Just down at the very bottom is debt, but it's not related to bonds. We would just let you know we do have right now 30 million in the existing budget. Only one payment, which is 1.5 million for town hall, based on the time that would take place. It would only be one installment, but that has nothing to do with bonds, but this was more of a debt slide. So from a bond standpoint, staff would recommend 7 million, 60 and 10. What you have in front of you, I think I saw maybe a CIP in front of you. The red basically means on this sheet, if you're looking at the red, except for town hall, you'll see town hall has 26 million there. 3 or 4 million of it is in black. That's already funded that we're, continuing to move that project forward. The 26 million there is just debt. It's installment financing. But everything else you see in red would be stuff that we would propose that we would need a funding source for. And we would look at bonds for those. What I would tell you, though, is don't get hung up on individual projects. You'll see projects out, you got to remember bonds are for a 10-year period, a 7-year period, and you extend it 3 more years for 10 years. So if you see a project out in the future year that's in red, don't get hung up on that project. If a private developer comes along and builds that project, awesome, that would be great. Or, you know, some of these projects, I imagine the price is going to go up 5 years from now, 7 years from now, 10 years from now. So there's no way these projects, the number you see on here are locked in stone. They haven't been bid. So I just want to continue to remind you of that. There will be projects that we're going to hopefully receive CRTPO funds on. There'll be projects we'll get grants on. But I imagine prices will go up too. So we have to have a funding source to continue funding these projects. Fund balance, we're going to be dipping into fund balance on a lot of these projects and other sources that we have that are in black on the sheet of paper that you have in front of you. That's just a CIP, a 5-year CIP that you have in front of you. But we must have a funding source for these projects to continue going down the path. As you can see, some of these road projects are partially funded. And once we get to that point, let's just say, for whatever reason, this board says, no, Anthony, we can't get comfortable with the bond, we're not going to do it. These projects that you see in red, once we get up to that point of dollars we already got allocated, they will stop. Or we'll have to pull funds out of fund balance. We come back to the board and say, hey, board, to continue moving forward with these projects, we need to find another funding source. That would be fund balance, and that's where we come back. So I know we've talked about this quite a few times. Looking for direction from the board. If we do not get clear direction tonight from the board, what we would have before you probably on the May 15th, you've seen the calendar before, May 15th is sort of drop dead date. We would come back to you with a resolution, probably leaving the dollar amounts blank, just to give you one last shot at it. And then after that, if the board decides not to move forward with bonds, then we would drop it. And then we would have to, we'd have to go back to the drawing board on those projects, see how we stand on money, continue those projects until we can get to a stop point, and then we'd come back to the board on those particular projects for further guidance at a later date. So I'll stop there. I know I rambled enough, and leave it up to you, and we'll answer any questions you may have.
All right, so we started this conversation, is it last Monday? And we need to continue this conversation on how are we going to pay for these future road projects? How are we going to pay for these future Parks and Rec projects? There's been a lot of discussion at the last meeting, back and forth. Kind of like to know where folks are, if you've had an opportunity to talk, maybe take a stab at it. Anybody want to take a stab? Commissioner Partee?
Yeah, at our last retreat, I'm willing to accept our town manager's advisement that we fund or we drop a referendum onto the voters, present a referendum to the voters in the amount of $70,000 so we can keep our projects funded moving forward. That's where I'm at.
70 million? Yeah.
I said that.
I said that last time. 70 million, thank you.
All right, so the 60 million with transportation bonds and the 10 for Parks and Rec. Anyone else? Conversations around where we want to go? This is setting up our community to be able to keep these projects moving. I always like for us to consider, leaving things, I hate passing off a budget that's not, or a town that isn't in good financial footing, and having ways to pay for their projects. Anyone? So we got 60 and Commissioner Kidwell.
So at that retreat, as I recall, there was 3 for 70 million. I threw a number out at 45 million. And then we had 2 commissioners saying they were waiting on getting all the information for the budget before they made a decision. And I don't think we've received all the information for the budget for them to make a decision. I'm not putting them on the spot or nothing, but I will say I completely understand where they're coming from and would encourage staff to get them that information unless they've already changed their minds or made up their minds with a different number, so we could review all that.
Mr. Roberts?
There is $0 related to the bond in this budget. There will be, no matter what you do, there will be $0 in this budget. You have to remember, I don't know if the citizens will approve this bond, and until they approve it, we will not put anything. So FY '24 will not be impacted. Depending on if it gets to that point, what citizens do, any type of debt service payments will not hit until '25 and later. So I will be presenting the manager's recommended budget later tonight, but there's nothing in there for bonds.
So they are not tied together?
They are not, I can't because I don't know if the citizens will even approve it. So we're just trying to get to a point where, to allow the citizens to approve something if the board so chooses. So no matter what you do, there will be zero impact for FY '24.
Any additional discussion? Where do we want to go? Commissioner Boone?
Yeah, I think the silence is deafening here.
It certainly is.
I am not at the $60 million for the transportation bonds. I'm more in the neighborhood of 50. We kind of had the discussion around there, and I don't want to put words in people's mouths, but I think the commissioner said 45, one said 130, staff says 60. I would have to say I'm at more of a 50-10.
50-10. Anyone else want to weigh in? Commissioner Kovacs?
I previously said I was okay with the 70 total, but I also find it to be important to pass, to be able to get a bond on, so I'm willing to work and find a compromise with whatever everybody's comfortable with.
Okay. So can we continue to have these conversations? Maybe, Mr. Roberts, we can schedule some opportunities to have conversations with commissioners?
And just to jump on what I think commissioners are, maybe looking at some compromise, and I think that is fine. 60-10 was sort of the number that staff was comfortable with. Obviously, you saw we didn't go any higher than that. So if it is 50-10, if that's what it settles on, that's fine too. That allows, these projects to continue to move forward. And there'll be, like I say, grants and various things that come up. So if it's 55, 50-10, whatever it may be, staff, we'll give you whatever information you want. Our sort of top numbers were 60-10, and we're comfortable with that.
Financially comfortable with that. So I think the only thing I would remind the board is that, if you go too low, for example, with the Parks and Rec bonds, it costs us money every time we go forward and look to cash out those bonds. We're paying something for that. So hopefully, Ms. Huffman, whenever we do get the bonds approved, whatever those numbers look like, you will do your magic and get us the best rates possible.
Mayor, just one other thing
yes,
I would
Mr.
say. I
Roberts.
think it's very important that if the board is going to move forward with a bond, that obviously as many of us up here are saying the same thing in approval, I think that's a good message to send to the citizens. So if we're going to do that, whether it's 50-10, I'm comfortable with 50-10, I'm comfortable with 60-10, or somewhere in between. But the more of us up here that are agreeing on that, the better off, I think, and the better message we send to the public.
100% agree with that. I think that if this board is going to put a bond package forward to the voters, then they need to be supportive of the package. So that's why it's so important for everyone up here to work together to find that, what's the sweet spot? All right, seeing that there's no other discussion or conversation, it is 20 till 6, and we will go ahead and adjourn from the pre-meeting, and we'll come back at 6 o'clock for our regular board meeting.